In 1885, Montana, a young woman arrives as a mail-order bride with a secret weighing on her heart. She has not uttered a single word in 2 long years. Her silence sparks rumors and concern throughout the frontier town, but it is one fateful encounter with a gentle, unassuming cowboy that lights the spark of change. When her new fiancé's dark intentions threaten her future and her very life, this quiet bride must decide whether to remain voiceless or find the courage to speak up and claim her destiny. Wondering how she overcomes betrayal and danger, and whether she can reclaim the voice she once thought she had lost forever. Stay with us until the end of this gripping saga to find out. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for even more riveting stories. Your support helps us bring these tales to life day after day. In the summer of 1885, deep in the wilds of Montana Territory, a stagecoach rattled into a stop before a modest hotel in the newly christened town of Sweet Grove. Off stepped a young woman named Eliza Hart, clutching a battered carpetbag in one hand and a letter of intent in the other. Rumors spread quickly among the onlookers. She was a mail-order bride, but something about her was peculiar. She never spoke. As she carefully set foot on the dusty street, a hush fell over the crowd. The brim of her bonnet concealed much of her face, yet her dark eyes were filled with a mixture of unease and determination. She had traveled halfway across the country from Ohio, carrying hopes of finding a safe future with a rancher she had never met. Standing outside the general store, Margaret Reed, a woman with a warm smile and hair wrapped in a practical bun, raised her hand in greeting. She had agreed to welcome Eliza on behalf of Ellis Broderick, the man who had written the courtship letters. Margaret's kindly expression held a hint of curiosity, but also acceptance, as if she sensed that this newcomer carried burdens that could not be easily set down. "You must be Miss Hart," she said gently, removing her apron before stepping forward. "I'm Margaret Reed, and we've been expecting you. Mr. Broderick asked me to see that you settle in. He's a bit tied up at his ranch." Eliza nodded, the simplest response she could muster. She would have offered a polite thank you if she could, but her voice remained locked behind the same silent walls that had guarded it for 2 long years. The subtle twitch of her mouth was the only sign that she wished she could say more. Margaret asked no probing questions, only smiled in understanding, and led Eliza to the small hotel lobby with a motherly air. Inside, the walls were made of log and plaster, and the floors creaked with every step. A narrow staircase at the far end led up to small rooms rented out mostly to traveling merchants or the occasional ranch hand. Despite the faint odor of tobacco and stove ash that lingered in the corridors, the hotel offered a certain frontier charm. Eliza followed Margaret up the steps as the older woman explained that the place was run by Mrs. Abbott, a chatty soul who loved to exchange gossip over sweet tea. The moment Eliza entered her room, she released a shaky breath. The space was spare, a single bed with a thin mattress, a little nightstand, and a small wooden chair beneath a window. Setting down her carpetbag, she felt the enormity of her decisions settle over her like a leaden cloak. She was in Sweet Grove now, hundreds of miles from the tragedy she had left behind. She carried within her a silence as deep as the Montana sky. Margaret's gentle voice drifted in from the hallway, promising to return later with a proper meal. Eliza walked to the window, gazing out at the sprawling countryside. Beyond the ramshackle buildings lay open fields and distant hills, sun-scorched yet undeniably beautiful. She reminded herself why she had taken this gamble. The letter from Ellis Broderick offered a chance at security, perhaps even the stirrings of happiness. Anything was better than the whispers and judgment she had faced back home. Here in this rough-hewn corner of the West, her life would begin anew, even if she had to start it without a single word. The following morning, Eliza stood at her window, heart pounding as she watched Ellis Broderick tie his horse to the hitching post outside. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with blonde hair beginning to recede at the temples. He cast a look around with keen eyes, and once satisfied no one was staring too hard, he climbed the stairs to the upper rooms. 3 brisk knocks on her door made Eliza stiffen. She opened it to find Ellis in a neatly pressed coat that hinted at both prosperity and vanity. He greeted her with a tight smile, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. "Miss Hart," he said, voice deep and measured. "I'm Ellis Broderick. I'd have come sooner, but ranch business kept me, I trust. Margaret made you comfortable?" Eliza could only nod, forcing a small smile in return. She gestured to the lone chair, hoping he'd sit, but he remained standing, studying her closely. She could feel his scrutiny, as surely as if he had probed her with questions. After several beats of silence, he cleared his throat and said, "Margaret mentioned you have a condition. You cannot speak," though it stung to hear it stated so bluntly. She inclined her head in affirmation. His response was a slight narrowing of the eyes and a barely perceptible curling of his lip. I see that was not in our correspondence, but I suppose we'll manage. He looked her up and down before continuing. The ranch house needs a woman's presence, cooking, cleaning, sewing. We can wed once the traveling preacher comes through in about a month. Is that acceptable? Again, Eliza forced herself to nod in apprehension churning in her stomach. The letter that brought her here had described a man who sought companionship and a hopeful future. But Ellis spoke of marriage as if it were a simple contract. She silently reminded herself that she had limited options. Returning home was not an option at all. Later that day, he invited her downstairs for supper. Mrs. Abbott served overcooked roast beef, but Ellis seemed too absorbed in his own thoughts to notice. He launched into a monologue about the ranch, 200 head of cattle, acres of grazing land that required constant upkeep, and the improvements he planned to make once she moved in. Whenever he paused for breath, Eliza tried to offer a small nod or direct her gaze at him supportively. Part of her yearned to let him know that she was more than just another ranch hand, that she once had a voice and a life of her own. But the words as always lodged in her throat when they finished the meal. Ellis helped her with her chair in a gesture that tried to mimic politeness as they stepped onto the wooden walkway outside the hotel. He told her, "I'll come fetch you tomorrow. You can see the place for yourselves." His tone suggested an expectation that she would be impressed, or at least content. Eliza watched him ride off, the sound of the horse's hooves echoing in the quiet street. Before dawn the next morning, she would pack her few possessions and brace herself to move into a world of new routines. Uncertain comfort in a man who looked at her less like a partner and more like a function. Yet behind her silent composure lay the smallest ember of hope that she would find kindness, or at least not cruelty, under his roof. The Broderick ranch house was large, but eerily sparse. Eliza noticed gaps on the walls where pictures might once have hung, and tables that bore circular dust rings, suggesting items had been removed recently. It felt as though someone had tried to erase the presence of another woman. Ellis's late wife, perhaps. Over the coming days, Eliza busied herself with sweeping floors, washing curtains, and making simple meals out of whatever provisions Ellis provided. The routine was a respite from her own swirling anxieties. She took a quiet comfort in tangible tasks, improving her worth through chores and small gestures. Yet each evening Ellis returned from the fields with a shadowed expression. He sometimes drank from a flask, then quietly criticized a minor detail. Soup not hot enough, the floor not swept thoroughly, the laundry folded at the wrong angle. He never shouted, never raised a hand, but a layer of tension clung to the air. Eliza sensed he harbored some secret disappointment. Perhaps she guessed it was the silence he could not penetrate, or the fact that he had expected a more talkative bride. The town of Sweet Grove occasionally intruded upon her solitude in the form of visitors. One afternoon, Mrs. Abbott from the hotel arrived bearing a basket of apples and plenty of opinions. "You poor dear," she said sympathetically, though her tone held more curiosity than kindness. "It must be quite the challenge being unable to speak your mind." When Eliza offered a polite shake of her head, Mrs. Abbott sighed. "Well, Mr. Broderick is trying, I suppose. Though after he lost his first wife, he's never been the same. We're all praying for you, of course." Another time, Margaret Reed herself showed up with a freshly baked loaf of bread, her expression gentler than Mrs. Abbott's. She beckoned Eliza outside to the dusty garden patch behind the house where late spring weeds thrived. "Sometimes," Margaret said, pressing the bread into Eliza's hands, "silence isn't a curse. It's a place to rest until your heart can heal. Don't let folks in town make you think otherwise." Eliza nodded, grateful for this small moment of human warmth. She wished she could tell Margaret everything, the reason behind her voicelessness, the nightmares that still woke her in the small hours, the ache of guilt that settled in her bones like a stubborn winter. But those memories, those confessions remained tucked away. Life continued in this uneasy rhythm, punctuated by chores, Ellis's reserved manner, and the occasional visitor. Then came the evening of the Sweet Grove Church Social, an event that was supposed to celebrate the arrival of summer. Ellis insisted that Eliza attend. "We'll show everyone we're a respectable couple," he said with a half-forced grin. That comment alone left a knot in her stomach. The church basement was festooned with ribbons and wildflowers. The ladies had baked pies and cookies. The men set up chairs for a small dance floor, and a fiddler played lively tunes. It might have been a night of pleasant company and laughter. Instead, it was where Eliza discovered how easily Ellis's mask could crack under the weight of small misfortunes, and how quickly her silence could become the target of his growing resentment. The social had barely begun when a boy running wild knocked the punch bowl clean off the table. In the scramble to catch it, Eliza backed into Ellis, spilling sweet punch across the front of his starched shirt. Her heart hammered as she whirled around expecting annoyance, but not the venom she witnessed in his eyes. The chatter in the basement hushed in an instant. "You useless," Ellis began, voice dripping with contempt. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to cut through the silent crowd. He grabbed Eliza's arm with a painful squeeze. "You can't even speak an apology, can you? And now you ruin my evening." Frightened, she tried to step back, but he only tightened his grip. The hush deepened, as if everyone had collectively held their breath. Mrs. Abbott froze with her cup of cider. Margaret Reed looked ready to intervene, her brow furrowed. Even the fiddler stopped mid-tune. Eliza trembled, humiliated by Ellis's words and terrified by the anger in his gaze. She willed herself to speak. Any single word would do. But her throat constricted and her lungs refused to give voice to the panic. The best she managed was a broken exhalation. Suddenly, Margaret stepped forward. "That's enough, Mr. Broderick," she said firmly. Several others murmured agreement, though not all dared to speak up. Ellis released Eliza's arm with a jerk, causing her to stumble backward. Her eyes began to sting with tears, but she refused to let them fall in front of him. She spun around and pushed past the onlookers, fleeing up the basement steps into the cool night air. A few voices called after her. But the sound that reached her next was neither comfort nor condemnation. It was the lonely shuffle of footsteps in the alley behind the church. Eliza slipped into that narrow space, pressing her back to the rough wooden siding. She clenched her hands, knuckles white, fighting sobs that threatened to tear free. But as usual, no words came. Only silent tears slid down her cheeks. Margaret found her minutes later, her expression a blend of empathy and fury. "Eliza," she whispered, placing a hand on the younger woman's shoulder. "You don't have to go back to that ranch tonight. Come stay with me above the general store. I won't let anyone treat you so poorly under my watch." Eliza stared at her, relief mingling with shame. It felt wrong to flee her supposed future husband, but the memory of Ellis's scathing words and bruising grip still pulsed on her arm. She could not imagine returning to that ranch. Not tonight, not with the threat of more anger. Margaret gave a tight nod as if reading Eliza's hesitation. "We'll speak with the preacher, see if there's a way to annul or at least delay this arrangement. No one should force you into a marriage you dread." Without further discussion, Eliza allowed Margaret to guide her through the dimly lit streets. In the distance, muffled dancing music resumed. Perhaps the gathered crowd had decided to continue their festivities. But Eliza felt as though she had slipped into an entirely separate world, one where she was no longer simply a silent bride, but a woman searching desperately for a safe haven. That night, in a spare room above the store, she surrendered to exhausted sleep, uncertain of what the morning would bring. Morning light revealed a bustling scene on the street below Margaret's general store. Eliza peered out from the upstairs window, wagons rolling in, ranchers stopping for supplies, and children dashing off to school. Every so often, a face turned upward, eyes momentarily lingering on the new silhouette behind the glass. She was certain the whispers about the silent bride now included the drama of Ellis Broderick's outburst. When she ventured downstairs, Margaret greeted her with a soft smile and a mug of tea. "We'll open soon. Are you comfortable helping me stock shelves? You'd have something to keep your hands busy." Eliza nodded. Work provided a refuge from thought and memory. While lifting boxes, Eliza caught sight of a newcomer sauntering through the door. He was tall, though not quite as tall as Ellis, and his dusty boots suggested a long ride. His features were warm, and he removed his weathered hat respectfully upon entry. "Morning, Miss Reed," he said to Margaret. "Name's Luke Thorne. Word is you might know which ranches around here need an extra hand." Margaret offered him a cordial nod. "Luke, is it? Well, I know the Reed Ranch. My brother's place needs help with branding and fence mending. And there's the Weston spread, too. Just steer clear of the Broderick Ranch for now," she added, glancing apologetically at Eliza. Following Margaret's gaze, Luke noticed Eliza as she arranged tins of flour behind the counter. Perhaps he sensed her nervousness, or perhaps he simply recognized that she offered no verbal greeting. Whatever the reason, he dipped his head politely. "Morning, ma'am," he said in an even tone with none of the pity or confusion that most people displayed. Eliza returned a small tilt of the head, her eyes darting away after the briefest moment of eye contact. A flicker of curiosity danced in Luke's gaze, but he asked no questions. Instead, he discussed prospective ranch work with Margaret, occasionally shifting his attention toward Eliza with a polite, encouraging nod. Noticing how gently he navigated the conversation, Margaret seized the opportunity. You know, she said with forced casualness, we just got some heavier items delivered, and Eliza here, well, it's easier on her if we get help carrying them. She's had a rough go of it recently. Luke responded with immediate kindness, offering to unload the supply crates from the store's back porch. In the next half hour, he made several trips carrying everything from sacks of grain to barrels of nails. Eliza assisted by pointing out where items belonged, her silence supplemented by gestures or a quick chalk slate. Margaret provided Luke seemed entirely untroubled by this wordless communication, replying in a steady, friendly manner. When the job was done, sweat glistened on his brow. He set down the last box and gave a good-natured stretch of his shoulders. Much obliged for letting me help, he said. I appreciate honest work more than anything. Margaret smiled at him as she fetched payment, but he waved it off, just a simple favor. He insisted Eliza could not resist a gentle smile. She had grown so used to Ellis's simmering displeasure and the town's wary curiosity that Luke's calm acceptance felt like finding an unexpected flower in a desert. As he stepped out into the sunlight, he tipped his hat in her direction. Something fluttered in Eliza's chest, a subtle spark of warmth she hadn't felt in a very long time. Within a week, Luke Thorne became a familiar sight at Margaret's store. He dropped by between fence repairs and cattle checks, often to gather small supplies. Tobacco, matches, fresh produce, and sometimes with an excuse that seemed more social than practical. Margaret teased him kindly about this. Best be careful, Mr. Thorne, or folks might say, you're sweet on the store rather than the ranch. Eliza, meanwhile, found an easy rapport with Luke in a way she never expected. He asked only the kinds of questions that required a nod or a shake of the head. If he needed more detail, he offered her the small chalk slate without the slightest hint of discomfort. In return, he shared stories of the places he'd traveled, a cattle drive in Texas, a short stint as a ranch hand in Wyoming. He told her about his late grandmother, a woman who taught him how to draw. From a worn leather journal in his saddlebag, he produced pencil sketches, meadowlarks perched on fence posts, distant mountains in the swirl of a raging river after spring snowmelt. What do you think, he asked her one day, showing a half-finished sketch of Sweet Grove's dusty main road. The lines caught the sun-bleached clapboard facades in the twin spires of the local church in surprising detail. Eliza's eyes lit up as she tapped the church steps on the drawing, smiling to indicate how realistic it looked. She tried to trace an imaginary improvement in the air, but Luke chuckled. That's a good idea, he said, adjusting shading with his pencil. I never considered that angle before. One evening he brought her a small token, a roughly carved wooden bird, its wings outstretched as if to take flight. Made this out of some spare pine, he said, looking almost shy. It's no masterpiece, but I thought you might like it. Eliza cradled the carving in her hands, her cheeks warming at the simple yet heartfelt gift. She placed it on the store windowsill where the late afternoon sun could highlight its grain. In that small act, she wordlessly told him how deeply she valued the gesture. But peace in Sweet Grove was fleeting. Ellis Broderick had kept his distance since the disastrous social, presumably nursing his bruised pride. Yet rumors circulated that he was seen in the tavern muttering about his bride who'd run off. Some folks claimed he was planning to force Eliza back, while others suggested he was trying to drown his sorrows in whiskey. The threat of Ellis's return loomed one day when he stormed into the store just as Luke was up on a ladder fixing a loose board for Margaret. Ellis glowered at the sight of Eliza contentedly stocking shelves while Luke tinkered above. His eyes snapped with resentment. So this is why you left me? Ellis sneered, nostrils flaring. Found a new man already? Eliza's heart seized. She took an involuntary step backward. Luke, however, calmly climbed down the ladder, stepping between them. Mr. Broderick, he began in a measured tone. There's no call to be hurling accusations. Miss Hart left because you gave her reason to. You keep out of this ranch hand. Ellis spat. She was mine to wed. A signed contract. Luke's eyes hardened, but his voice stayed collected. I don't see a ring on her finger, and I don't see a heart that wants you back. At those words, Ellis's face darkened further, and for a moment Eliza feared violence. But after a tense stare down, Ellis simply cursed under his breath and stomped out. Luke turned back to her, gently asking with his gaze if she was all right. Eliza exhaled, the tension in her shoulders easing. Though she couldn't speak her gratitude, she hoped the relief on her face conveyed what her voice could not. Days later, a tall, lanky stranger walked into the store claiming to be a private investigator by the name of Silas Vaughn. His suit bore the dust of travel, and he carried a worn briefcase that seemed to hold official papers. He approached the counter where Eliza was organizing new shipments of flour. I'm looking for a woman by the name of Eliza, or possibly Eliza Collins, he said, pronouncing the second surname with careful emphasis. At once, Eliza felt the blood drain from her face. She had recognized that name, her family name, but had forced herself never to use it again. Her hand gripped the edge of the counter. Silas Vaughn noticed her reaction and gave a humorless smile. I believe I've found you, Miss Collins, or should I say Miss Hart. Margaret, who had been listening from a nearby shelf, stepped forward to intercede. Excuse me, Mr. Vaughn, but could you kindly explain your business? Vaughn reached into his case and withdrew a folded piece of yellowed newspaper. She's wanted for questioning regarding a fire that occurred in Ohio 2 years ago. A suspicious fire that claimed the lives of Frederick and Charlotte Collins, as well as their young son Andrew. He paused, letting the grim words sink in. Survivors said Eliza was the only one rescued from the flames. The room went utterly still. Margaret glanced at Eliza, noting her trembling hands and stricken expression. Vaughn pressed on. Some folks from her old town claim that the fire might have been set intentionally. They hired me to find her, and here she is, living under a different surname. Luke Thorne entered at that moment, carrying a crate of supplies from out back. At the sight of Vaughn's predatory stance, he set the crate aside. What's going on? He asked in a low voice, stepping closer to Eliza. None of your affair, Vaughn snapped, but Luke's posture spoke volumes. He wasn't about to let anyone intimidate Eliza. Vaughn cleared his throat. I have documents indicating that Miss Collins inherited a significant estate after that fire. The question remains whether she orchestrated the tragedy. Eliza burned with the need to protest, but as always, her voice stayed locked behind fear. She remembered that terrible night the lamp knocked over during practice. The sudden rush of flames, her frantic screams. She recalled being pulled from the blaze too late to save anyone else. The shock had consumed her words. Seeing her anguish, Margaret gripped the counter's edge. Mr. Vaughn, we have folks in this town who can vouch for Miss Hart's character. She is no arsonist. Vaughn gave a dismissive shrug. Be that as it may, I have a job to do. There are those who want closure or punishment for the Collins tragedy. Miss Hart needs to cooperate, or we'll let the courts decide. Luke placed an arm protectively around Eliza's shoulders. Then we'll cooperate. But you won't threaten her. She'll tell you what she knows. Eliza silently cursed her inability to speak. The magnitude of her old life colliding with her new one felt like an avalanche. Ellis Broderick was one problem, but Silas Vaughn's accusation struck at the core of the nightmare that had stolen her voice in the first place. Whether she liked it or not, the truth about the fire and her silence would have to come out soon. The next day, Eliza sat at a small table behind Margaret's store, a chalkboard resting atop her knees. Across from her sat Silas Vaughn, flipping through papers as though searching for any inconsistency he could use against her. Luke stood just behind her chair, arms folded, watchful and unwavering in his support. Margaret had taken on the role of a mediator, ready to intervene if Vaughn's interrogation became too invasive. Eliza took a shuddering breath and began writing chalk scraping against the board. I was 19, practicing music in my family's parlor after midnight. A lamp got knocked over. I tried to stop the oil from spreading, failed. The house ignited. Each phrase took enormous effort. She paused between sentences, tears threatening to blur her vision. Vaughn read the words with impassive eyes, nodding for her to continue. Eliza wrote, I screamed for help. My brother Andrew was upstairs. My parents were asleep. I couldn't save them. I inhaled smoke until my throat burned. Neighbors pulled me out. My family did not survive. Margaret exhaled softly. Sympathy etched across her features. Luke pressed a comforting hand to Eliza's shoulder, lending her strength. Vaughn placed another document on the table, pointing to a signature. So you inherited the Collins estate. Some claim you intentionally started that fire for money. Eliza felt her hands tighten around the chalk until it nearly snapped. She wrote in tense, jagged letters, never wanted the inheritance, fled. Once I could walk, couldn't bear the pity nor the accusations. Vaughn studied her anguished expression. Was there anyone with a motive to discredit you? He pressed, an angry relative. Rival Eliza gave a slight shake of her head. Then, recalling the cold stares of certain townsfolk back home, she added one last sentence. They hated me for surviving when my family did not. The investigator leaned back his chair, scraping the porch floor. I'll send a telegram to confirm your account. If it checks out, there's little reason to keep hounding you. But be prepared, there are folks who may still want your name dragged through the mud. Before he could stand, Margaret interjected. I think we've given you everything we can for now, Mr. Vaughn. It's time for you to let Eliza breathe. Her tone left no room for argument. Vaughn gathered his documents and tipped his hat, offering a curt nod. I'll stay in Sweet Grove a few days, if you recall. Anything else, find me at the hotel. Once he was gone, Eliza let out a shaky sigh. Luke moved around to kneel before her, his eyes searching hers. You did it, he said quietly. You faced the darkest moment of your past. You've carried that alone for too long. She wrote with trembling chalk. I'm scared. He'll twist it around, more talk. Luke carefully took the chalk from her. No matter what he or anyone else says, you're not alone. Not anymore, Eliza swallowed the knot in her throat. She could see the fierce sincerity in Luke's eyes, and in that moment she realized how deeply she cared for this gentle cowboy who treated her with respect rather than pity. Sometimes the greatest acts of love were not grand declarations but quiet, unwavering presence. Margaret placed a comforting hand on Eliza's shoulder. We'll stand by you, dear. The truth will outlive their suspicions, and for the first time in years, Eliza felt a cautious thread of hope that she could break free from her silent torment. That afternoon, word came from the sheriff. Ellis Broderick had bought large quantities of lamp oil and asked suspicious questions about insurance on his ranch, on top of everything. Silas Vaughn's inquiries suggested Ellis had a history of fraud under different names. This doesn't look good. Sheriff Duncan told Luke and Margaret. Eliza stood nearby, listening intently. He might be planning to stage a fire like the ones he's rumored to have done before. A wave of nausea hit Eliza. Fires haunted her dreams. The thought of another raging blaze set by Ellis was terrifying. She thought of the orchard behind Ellis's ranch house, of the little garden she had weeded, of how easily flames could devour all of it. Gripping her chalkboard, she wrote frantically, We must stop him. I know how fires spread. I can help. Luke's eyes flashed with concern. Eliza, that's dangerous. If he catches on that we're interfering. But she shook her head, her expression resolute. She remembered standing helpless in her family's burning home. Now she could use her knowledge to prevent another tragedy. Margaret nodded slowly, setting her jaw. We can't let him set a blaze. The man's unhinged enough to hurt anyone who tries to stop him. By dusk, a small group had gathered the sheriff, Luke and a few ranch hands willing to intervene. Silas Vaughn joined them, not out of altruism, but because he was still pursuing his investigation into Ellis's misdeeds. They positioned themselves at various vantage points around Ellis's ranch, waiting in tense silence for any sign of suspicious activity. Sure enough, as the moon rose a sliver of white in a star-draped sky, Ellis emerged carrying canisters that glinted ominously from her hidden spot beside a barn. Eliza watched him pour trails of oil along the back walls, moving quickly and methodically. Her heart pounded at the realization he was skilled at this, no doubt having done it multiple times. Suddenly, a lone plank creaked under someone's weight. Ellis froze, turning the lantern in the direction of the sound. The next instant, he swung out a revolver and fired into the darkness. The bullet ricocheted off a stone, sending sparks into the night. Another shot rang out, and a lantern went tumbling to the ground. Flames sparked and began to lap at the oil-soaked boards. Eliza dashed forward, ignoring Luke's startled shout. She pulled a wool blanket from where they had stashed firefighting supplies and flung it onto the nascent flames, trying to smother them before they could spread. The heat singed her lashes, the smell of burning oil triggering nightmarish memories. Still, she pressed on, stamping out embers until black smoke choked her lungs. In the midst of the chaos, Luke and the sheriff tackled Ellis, wrestling him to the ground before he could fire again or feed more fuel to the flames. Silas Vaughn grabbed Ellis's fallen canisters quickly, shifting them away from the rising heat. For a few frantic minutes, the group battled the small blaze, heaving buckets of water and stamping out embers. When at last the fire succumbed to their efforts, Eliza sank to her knees, coughing. Luke hurried to her side, an arm circling her shoulders. You're all right, he murmured. She blinked away tears and looked up, relieved to see the flames nearly extinguished. Ellis Broderick lay bound and furious, shouting insults that fell on unhearing ears. Silas Vaughn knelt beside him, reciting a list of charges he would face. As for Eliza, she allowed Luke's supportive grasp to remind her of one crucial difference between her past and her present. This time, she hadn't been alone in the battle against the fire. By the following morning, Ellis Broderick was in the town jail awaiting trial on charges of attempted arson fraud, and Moore Sheriff Duncan had telegraphed the authorities in larger Montana towns, where Ellis, under assumed identities, had apparently carried out similar schemes. Meanwhile, Silas Vaughn concluded his investigation into Eliza Hart's alleged involvement in her family's tragedy. After verifying testimonies and evidence, he publicly announced that she was never a suspect, merely a survivor. With a new measure of freedom, she found the courage to let go of her old secrets. 3 months later, in the crisp glow of early autumn, Eliza stood in the backyard garden of Margaret's store, wearing a dress of creamy white and clutching a bouquet of wildflowers. The backyard had been turned into a simple wedding space. In the crowd of onlookers, Mrs. Abbott dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief, while other townsfolk whispered that never had they seen such a radiant bride. At the makeshift altar, Luke Thorne waited, in a dark suit borrowed from a friend, his hair neatly combed, but his eyes just as gentle and steadfast. Margaret Reed fussed with the train of Eliza's dress, tears threatening to spill from her eyes. "I've never been prouder," she whispered to Eliza, nudging her forward. Quiet music from a local fiddler drifted on the breeze, and the officiant, Reverend Giles, cleared his throat to begin the ceremony. When it came time for the vows, Eliza pressed a hand to her throat. Though she had spoken a few words in private to Luke after the night of the fire, the weight of an entire community listening now made her heart hammer. She glanced at Luke, who waited patiently, offering her a smile of complete reassurance. At last she found her voice a bit rough, still hesitant, but undeniably hers. Eliza Hart," she said softly, each syllable trembling with emotion. "Take you, Luke, Thorne, to be my husband, to share in our silences and our words, to face the fires both in the world and in our hearts together. I promise to love you with all that I am." Luke's own eyes glistened. He repeated his vows, punctuating each phrase with a tender sincerity that resonated through everyone present. "Luke Thorne, take you, Eliza Hart, as my wife. I pledge to protect you, cherish you, and honor your courage, whether you speak 1,000 words or only a single one. Your strength has shown me a new way of hearing the world." They exchanged rings, and Margaret led a cheer. Applause erupted, mingled with a joyous whoop from a ranch hand. In that moment, Eliza felt the prairies, the mountains, and the entire sky celebrating with them. The hush she once carried in her soul had transformed into a melody that needed no perfect pitch, just sincerity and the warmth of shared devotion. Later, after the small reception of homemade pies and dancing in the garden, Luke and Eliza stole away to the front porch for a quiet moment. The day's light was fading into a fiery sunset, painting the horizon with vivid reds and golds. Luke opened his leather journal, flipping to a blank page. "Think I'll sketch us here," he murmured. "Start our story on paper the same way we've been building it in life." Eliza leaned into him, her breath steady as she watched him outline two silhouettes under the big Montana sky. The dryness in her throat no longer frightened her. She knew her words would come in their own time, and even if they didn't, Luke would still understand her. At last, as the evening wind carried the scent of newly harvested wheat, she let her voice slip free, barely above a whisper. "I love you, Luke. Thank you for listening, even when I couldn't speak." His hand paused, pencil hovering above the page. He turned to meet her gaze with that gentle, unwavering smile. "My darling Eliza," he said, resting his forehead against hers. "Your silence spoke volumes long before today. I'm just grateful you finally trusted me enough to hear them." They kissed the porch, creaking beneath their feet in the warm twilight. Overhead stars began to dot the vast sky, reminding Eliza that some of the brightest lights emerge only after darkness falls, and that sometimes the deepest silence simply awaits the right moment to become a song. Looking back, this journey proves that silence doesn't equal weakness, and words aren't the only path to healing. Our heroine discovered that quiet resolve and unwavering kindness can triumph over fear, deception, and even the shadows of a tragic past. When she finally found her voice again, it wasn't just to speak out against wrongdoing, it was to embrace a future filled with hope, love, and self-confidence. Her story shows how powerful it is to stand up for yourself, no matter the odds. Thank you for coming along on this emotional journey with us. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the tale. Did any scene resonate with you the most? Share your opinions in the comments below so we can keep the conversation going. And remember to subscribe to our channel for more uplifting and dramatic stories you won't want to miss.